2 o'clock p.m. Royal Quarters. Examine the ground. The carpet is reasonably plush. The cleaning staff has failed to completely eliminate some errant grape juice stains, however. Pay cuts all around. Examine the stains. Word has it that Charles the Terror delights in deliberately pouring his glasses of grape juice on the floor. Examine the ceiling. There's nothing noteworthy about the ceiling in the royal quarters, though perhaps this is in itself is noteworthy. Examine the windows. Like the other windows in the palace, these are made of that's the same. These windows overlook the northern gardens. Examine the northern gardens. Sadly, the northern gardens are no longer anything more than strips of greenery lining the walk between the palace and the low squat building out back, which functions as the servants' quarters and guards' barracks. Examine that barracks building. This is a low squat building which functions as the servants' quarters and guards' barracks. You should probably get around to installing cameras in it, but that would mean lowering yourself to actually entering the building. Examine the Queen. Queen Sarah was born to the royal family of perhaps the most powerful principality in the Western world. 3 years later, she was the only surviving member of that family, as revolution swept Paris and her parents were executed before her very eyes. When the so-called Republic was swept away in turn 4 years later, the new king, a former colony minister, adopted the imprisoned princess to raise along with his own small children, Nicholas and Charlotte, perhaps for the public relations boost, or perhaps for some other purpose. At any rate, the Parisians soon found themselves with a female ward approaching 20, and it became quite imperative that she be pawned off on some other state as soon as possible. But not even the most backwater nations were willing to accept such an undesirable match for their princes, except for the greatest laughingstock of them all, Piedmont. The Queen herself is generally described in the media as being petite, even tiny, but this is actually not the case. Though nearly as tall as her late husband, she somehow manages to seem as if she's not taking up any space. Which is not to say that she has no presence. She so consistently seems to be on the verge of panicking that just having her in the room makes you feel as if you're about to have an anxiety attack. Examine the bed. Yes, it's a royal bed, so naturally it's 3 times as wide as any other bed in Piedmont. The fabric's 3 times as rich, yes, all of that. But the mattress, is it a Comodissimo Pro? Is it even a Schlafmeister 5000? Ha! See, one can't simply achieve this type of size without sacrificing comfort. And that's not a sacrifice you're prepared to make. When you are king, the bed will be replaced. Of course, rumor has it that the late king himself would scarcely have known the difference, given that he spends his nights in a decidedly more accommodating bed of Miss Sierra, leaving the Queen to share this one with Prince Charles. This was all in keeping with the Gallic custom of allowing children to share a bed with their parents until a scandalously advanced age. The quacks of Vienna will go on about how psychologically beneficial this all is, but as far as you're concerned, quite a few of Europe's problems can be attributed to the fact that half the Carolinian League is knee-deep in an Oedipal quagmire. Examine any vases. The usual accoutrement of the royal quarters have been removed for the nonce. Examine the medical rigging. The scaffolding, which at one point seemed as if it might swallow up the royal bed, has been reduced to this humble stand holding an IV bag and an oxygen mask. A shelf attached to the stand bears a glass of water. Examine the glass of water. The glass is filled with water. Examine the IV bag. This is a plastic bag connected to a tube which ends in a stopcock, currently shut. The bag is filled with... Oh dear. The inside of the bag is streaked with an all too familiar green substance. This is what was pumped into the king's veins? A bleeding from the local barber would have been more therapeutic. Examine the substance. It may just be an optical illusion, but the green streaks seem to be slowly slithering up the side of the IV bag. Examine the flexible tubing. This is a flexible plastic tube ending in a stopcock. Examine the stopcock. This is a valve which, when open, allows the fluid inside the IV bag to drip out at a measured rate. It is currently closed, however. Examine the oxygen mask. This is a simple rubber mask which fits over one's nose and mouth. It is attached to an oxygen canister which is currently turned off. Get the glass of water and the oxygen mask. Glass. The shelf gives way with a snap, causing you to fumble the glass. It shatters on the floor. "I didn't do it," Princess Charlotte cries, looking around wildly. Oxygen mask taken. Prince Charles comes tearing into the room and pulls a remote control car out from under the royal bed. "Honey," Queen Sarah begins, "we need to talk—" "Shut up, bitch!" the prince cries, giggling at his choice of words. Examine the prince. Prince Charles will continue to be called prince rather than king until his majority. That will occur at no such date, but rather when he dismisses his regent, and when he has enough direct backing for that dismissal to actually mean something. This seems unlikely to happen before the boy reaches puberty, giving you the better part of the decade to work your manipulations upon him, and perhaps convince him to relinquish power altogether in your favor. And even if you can't, in a world where death could come at any moment, 7 years of power is nothing at which to turn up one's nose. For now, however, you're looking at a 5-year-old boy known throughout the palace and, increasingly throughout the land, as Charles the Terror. Whether it's been pummeling the other little boys at his nursery school, which eventually led to the Christ minister undertaking his secular as well as religious education, thanks to the repeated pleas of the nobility, or, far worse, destroying furniture and setting fires around the palace, young Charles has, in his short life, left a trail of destruction and woe wherever he has gone. Managing him is the part of your future reign that you least look forward to. But you're hoping that a steady regimen of powerful sedatives will do the trick. Examine the glass on the ground. The broken glass ranges from big jagged shards to tiny slivers. Examine the remote control car. This is a vehicle about the size of your forearm, which can be driven about via a small transmitter. Give robot to boy. Prince Charles tosses the transmitter to the remote control car aside and grabs his new toy. "Cool!" he cries. Get the car and the transmitter. Oof, this is heavier than it looks. If remote control cars should prove unprofitable at some point, the manufacturers can rest assured and secure in the knowledge that they have a bright future ahead of them in the bowling ball industry. Transmitter taken. Examine the transmitter. The transmitter consists of a joystick which can be pushed in what exhaustive market research has proven are the 8 most popular directions. There are even little letters engraved in the plastic reading N, N-E, E, and so forth. Apparently, the car's movement is absolute rather than relative, guided by some sort of internal compass, no doubt, and a splendid bit of engineering. The transmitter also bears a screen which depicts the room as seen through the windshield of the vehicle. The angle is too poor to make out any detail, but at least you can tell which room the contraption is in. Usually. At present, it's unclear. Go south. Throne room. Princess Charlotte trails after you. Go east. Northeast Tower antechamber. Princess Charlotte trails after you. Drop the car. And also one of my bills for fun. Remote control car dropped. 500 franc bill. You're scarcely about to simply cast aside your hard-earned money, or hard-embezzled money at any rate. Give dagger to Charlotte. You hand Princess Charlotte your dagger, and she promptly slices her palm open with it. The angels drink the sugar from my blood, she explains, holding her lacerated hand up over her head as if offering it up to the heavens. And it is, in fact, grabbed by guard number 7578, who rushes in and refastens her straitjacket. I told you, he cries. Didn't I tell you? And now look what's happened. He leads her off. Bye, Princess Charlotte calls out cheerily. Let me know when you want to take over the world again. Go northeast. Northeast Tower, middle level. You are standing before an arch that connects the upper level of the palace, accessible to the southwest, with a massive marble spiral staircase that comprises the northeast tower, which leads up and down. Go up. Northeast Tower, top level. You are standing at the top of the massive marble spiral staircase that comprises the northeast tower. Before you, to the northeast, is the door to the quarters of Miss Sierra, the late king's mistress. The guard posted in front of Miss Sierra's room looks at you and sniggers. Well, hello there, he says. Just popped up to touch on some affairs of state, Examine the guard. Like the other guards of the palace, guard number 7504 is dressed in a sharp black uniform with fabulous gold-fringed epaulets. Northeast. Hey, do yourself a favor, the guard says. Don't go in there, 'cause you'll just be back here every night for some more, and you don't look like you can afford it. But hey, if you insist, don't let me stop you. Miss Sierra's quarters. Though Miss Sierra's room is among the most luxurious in the palace, rumor has it that it is actually a step down in quality from the room in which she plied her trade, back when she was a star attraction at Piedmont's finest brothel. A magnificent four-post canopy bed, industrial strength no doubt, is the centerpiece of the room, but the armoire and other assorted pieces are also of the highest quality. The carpeting is beyond plush and into the realm of sumptuous, while the curtains over the north and east-facing windows are of unmatched quality. Quite exquisite. You're not certain how you feel about having your quarters rivaled by those of a whore, but while on the one hand it could hardly be more insulting, you must admit that Miss Sierra earned her keep. She offered the king certain services that even you could not provide. Well, you could have, but it would have been unseemly. The exit lies to the southwest. Miss Sierra, dressed in loose olive drab and khaki clothing, sits on her bed reading a pattern of tarot cards. The moment you enter, she sweeps away the cards, hiding them from sight the way one might cover oneself if walked in upon during an intimate moment. In the same motion, she reaches beneath her pillow, produces a quite monstrous pistol, and points it at your head. You can almost feel the little red laser dot between your eyes. Firearms are not permitted inside the palace, you point out. Oh, shut up, Miss Sierra says. She brushes her raven black hair out of her face and glares at you, eyes blazing with emerald fury. Don't think I don't know what's going on out there. Now that the king's dead, things are liable to get really unstable really fast. I'm not feeling all that stable myself, so this had better be good. What do you want? Examine the gun she's pointing at me. This gleaming chrome hand cannon, with silencer, laser sights, and who knows what else, has got to be the single nastiest looking piece of equipment you have ever laid eyes on. How Miss Sierra came to possess it, especially given that wielding a firearm within the palace walls is a capital offense, you can only speculate. Your guess is that she rutted with Vericite and this was her payment. Examine the ground. The carpet is so sumptuous that you would be tempted to roll around on it, were doing so not so unseemly. Examine the ceiling. The ceiling is a huge mirror, not just over the bed, but from wall to wall. Examine the bed. The posts are ornately carved Haida totems. The canopy is an understated paisley. What a delicious paradox. That really brings out the accents in the drapes, and the bed itself, the satin glistening like the surface of a lake at sunset. The craftsmanship of the box frame. Frankly, you find the bed itself far more exciting than any activities that might take place upon it. Examine the drapes. The curtains are finely woven and ivory in color with subtle accents of lavender and frosted orange. A nearly impossible combination to pull off, yet somehow it works. Examine the armoire. This is a bonnetière, a type of one-door armoire traditionally used to store clothing and linen. You assume Miss Sierra uses it as a wardrobe. A symphony of brass and pine. It is all you can do to keep from throwing open the door and curling up inside. Examine the chest at the foot of her bed. You've heard the guards speak highly of Miss Sierra's chest before, but you don't think this piece of furniture is that to which they were referring. Examine the other pieces of furniture. Miss Sierra has accumulated a modest but high-quality assemblage of pieces, chief among them a bedside table, a quite thoroughly packed bookshelf, and a chest at the foot of her bed. Examine that bedside table. A lamp stands on the small table, which has a single drawer currently closed. Examine the lamp. This lamp is from the world-famous Soletta collection, a true masterpiece of the electrochandler's art. Examine the bookshelf. The shelves are crowded with such titles as Economic Proto-Nationalism, Applied Mercantilism and Its Discontents, Non-Perturbative Quantum Field Physics, Implications upon Exactly Soluble Nonlinear Solutions, and The Psychomorphology of the Clitoris and Arawak Oral Narrative. Examine Economic Proto-Nationalism. You're reasonably sure you saw this title on the Interior Minister's most recent list of banned books. Examine Non-Perturbative Quantum Field Physics. You could not possibly have less interest in this title. Examine Psychomorphology. You read the title again. The Psychomorphology of the Scandalous. Examine Miss Sierra. Your great-grandfather was a common butler for a family of middling nobility. A common butler, but a good one, good enough for his master to boast of his skills to the king, who selected his son, your grandfather, as a palace steward. And after a lifetime of service, your grandfather was deemed to have performed his duties sufficiently well that, upon his death, his family was elevated to the nobility, enabling you and your brothers to attend the same schools as the descendants of Charlemagne himself. Your education and your father's influence in court helped you to secure the palace ministry when the new king dismissed the one appointed by his father. You were given a room at the top of one of the palace towers. Generations of steady progress, bearing increasingly more delectable fruit. Meanwhile, Miss Sierra secured an identical room by letting the king hump her like a cur in the street. Admittedly, she is not without a certain appeal. Her dusky skin and indisputably glorious cheekbones mark her as exotically American, primarily Arawak, you believe, and they are well known as one of the more comely tribes. Yet her deep green eyes and European features betray her mixed heritage. Born in a whorehouse she may have been, but her sire was no doubt of the Piedmont nobility. Indeed, it's not entirely impossible that she might have not only been the late king's mistress, but his half-sister as well. Examine the window. All right. Ask her about... No, first. Apologies. Bribe her. Miss Sierra tucks the money away. Okay, she says. You get one question. Ask her about Venice. What can you tell me about Venice, you ask? Well, even though Verkites might not have the same motives, it's easy to see why Charles would let the war proceed. Venice is a tempting target, Miss Sierra says. They're probably the leading commercial center in Europe. Even if Piedmont doesn't conquer the place outright, the tribute alone would turn this place into one of the top states in the League. And since Venice isn't in the League, there's no need to worry about pissing off our allies. They'd love for us to do the dirty work and then swoop in and grab the spoils for themselves. Not that they expect anything to come of it. Genoa, Milan, Munich, Vienna, they've all tried attacking Venice before and been beaten back by the Venetian Swiss mercenaries. But Verkite is a Swiss mercenary. He knows where the Venetian weapons caches are and has raided them for himself. The Venetians probably have no idea that they're being attacked by their own guns. She shrugs. Show key to her, What am I supposed to make of this? Monsieur asks. If I'm supposed to... She pauses. Wait a minute. He's beating him? He's beating the child? Her eyes blaze. And here you'd been under the impression that green stars were virtually unheard of in nature. He's dead, she says. He's a dead man. She shoves you out of the way and storms out the door. Examine the tarot cards. Scandalous, simply scandalous. Not only are there several different decks all mixed together, but many of the characters depicted in a number of these sets are unclad. Examine the Ouija board. This is an electronic game board on which one can play Ouija. Apologies if I mispronounced that. A strategy game popular in China. Get both of those. Tarot cards taken. The board. You've never been much of a Ouija enthusiast yourself. Abstract patterns of dark and light? Leave that for the mathematicians and astronomers. Now chess. There's a game one can sink one's mental teeth into. Away, pawns. Tremble, knights. Die, bishops. Begone, queens. Beware, kings. For he who controls the castle controls all. I made a critical game error. I recorded a bit. If you'll forgive me, I'm going to undo that action. I did not take those items. I'm going to drive my car south. You push the joystick down, and the car cruises off to the south. You have a hard time making the new location out, but it seems to be Eastern Hall. Then I'm going to drive the car west. You push the joystick left, and the car cruises off to the west. You squint at the screen. Ah, yes. Eastern balcony. Drive, car, west. You push the joystick left, and the car goes flying off the balcony. The front of the car tips forward, and you expect to see the courtyard's compass rose appear on the transmitter's little screen. Instead, you see Argento Rico's head. He looks up a split second before impact and screams, and then there is nothing but static. Score. Thus far, you have eliminated one of your rivals. This gives you the rank of Palace Minister still. Now I'm going to get the cards. And fail to get the board. Southwest. Northeast Tower, top level. Down. Northeast Tower, middle level. Down. Northeast Tower, bottom level. You're standing at the base of the massive marble spiral staircase that comprises the Northeast Tower. The lower level of the palace is accessible to the southwest. Southwest. Northeast Tower, antechamber. South. Eastern ballroom. We've been here before. This time we're going to go east. Palace Chapel. The church at Avignon was still establishing itself when the palazzo was built, and consequently the original plans contained no provision for a chapel. Before long, the church insisted on placing representatives at every court within its sphere of influence, and thus part of the eastern wing was quickly renovated into this chamber. Though the low ceiling could not be raised due to the coffers minister's quarters just overhead, a huge circular panel of stained glass was installed in the eastern wall. The way it catches the sun during morning services is almost enough to keep one awake through the Christ minister's sermons. No services have been held here for a number of weeks, however. The chapel is undergoing further renovation and is simply an empty chamber at present. The Christ minister's quarters lie through a small door to the south, the eastern ballroom to the west. A guard stands in front of the entrance of Bonflesh's quarters, twitching. Examine the ground. This is a significantly higher grade of marble than that found elsewhere in the palace. It's imported. Examine the ceiling. A wide octagonal chandelier clings to the low ceiling. Same description. Examine the window. The window depicts a flock of angels or saints or some such. The shapes are nowhere near as interesting as the interplay of colors. Examine the altar. At present, the only remnants of the interior of the chapel are some bits of plaster. Examine the guard. Like the other guards in the palace, guard number 1959 is dressed in a sharp black uniform with fabulous gold-fringed epaulets. He's standing as if he'd forgotten to take the hanger out of it this morning, though. Also like the other guards in the palace, number 1959's direct superior is the war minister. But being of Avignonese extraction, and having been selected as the Christ minister's personal guard, it's reasonable to suspect that his true loyalties might lie elsewhere. Bribe him. Perhaps you aren't as much of a heathen as all that, the guard says, pocketing the bill. You may pass. Go south. Christ minister's quarters. The Christ minister's room is tiny and extremely spare. But this is not the product of a vow of poverty. Like most of the other ministers, his primary residence is a mansion on the coast, and he only comes here for religious services and to tutor the young prince. A cot, a desk, and a window are the only luxuries. A crucifix adorns the south wall, and the chapel lies through a small door to the north. On the desk are a math textbook and a history textbook. Pierre Bonfleche, the Christ minister, scowls as you enter. What do you want? Bonfleche growls. Examine him. There didn't used to be a church representative in every court in the League, and indeed there still isn't. Some of the German principalities have managed to stave off both Avignon and Rome and remain blessedly free of papal interference. But Piedmont is far too close to Avignon, in far too weak a state to be able to show such resistance. Christ minister Pierre Bonfleche is a veritable mountain of a man, a barrel-chested, ham-fisted giant with a thick, gray-stained beard like steel wool and a stench like a herd of dead goats who have been out in the sun decaying for a couple of days. Though scarcely an expert on the finer points of theology, Bonfleche is exactly the sort of man the Church likes to appoint as ministers in various courts. The delicate scholars who do know more than a few perfunctory prayers end up spending their entire lives within the walls of their various monasteries. Power is what the Church is interested in projecting, and Bonfleche provides that in spades. Examine the cot. The sheets are visibly stained. How unseemly. Examine the desk. This is a simple particle board desk. It probably cost all of 20 Piedmont francs. Do I examine the sheets separately? No. Examine the window. These windows overlook the eastern gardens. Examine the crucifix. This is a massive wooden cross, from which a silver Jesus dangles. Not a gold one like the ones in Rome, heaven forbid. Heaven forfend. Examine the Jesus. Jesus looks oddly Frankish for someone of Semitic ancestry. Examine the math textbook. It's a teacher's edition, with all the answers written in the margins. Far be it from the Christ minister to figure out 5 times 6 in his head. When we return, we will examine the history book.